Have you ever been mistaken for someone who didn't belong, just because of how you looked? Imagine showing up with a first-class ticket, only to be turned away without a second thought. But what if the girl they dismissed wasn't just any passenger? And what came next shook an entire system. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The suitcase lay open on the bed, half full and slightly crooked, just like the way Nariah Ellison felt about this whole trip. She stood over it, biting the inside of her cheek, folding and unfolding the same pair of black jeans as if they held the answers to everything she couldn't say out loud. At 15, she was used to being quiet. It wasn't that she didn't have things to say. She just learned early that some people hear better when you say less. The trip to Paris was supposed to be a milestone. Her father, Malcolm Ellison, had finally agreed to let her travel alone to meet his new wife, a woman she only knew through careful phone calls and warm smiles on FaceTime. She didn't hate the idea. She just didn't know what to do with it. It was the first time he'd trusted her to fly overseas on her own, and that meant something. It meant he saw her not just as his daughter, but as a young woman becoming someone in her own right. Their house in Stonebridge Heights was quiet that morning. Her dad had already left for an early call. He rarely said goodbye the traditional way. Instead, he left a note by her breakfast plate. Be kind, be smart, come home proud. Dad. It was chilly for a spring morning in Atlanta. At the airport, Nariah moved like she'd practiced in her head. Straight shoulders, light steps, eyes forward. The check-in staff didn't ask questions. Her e-ticket scanned clean. No problem there. She didn't expect any. Her dad had booked her a first-class seat on Starjet Airways, non-stop to Paris. But as she approached the boarding gate, she felt a strange tightness in her chest. Not fear exactly, just alertness. Like something was coming. The boarding area was sleek and modern, full of leather chairs and too bright lighting. She walked up to the counter with her passport and boarding pass. The woman behind the desk, sharp blazer, perfect bun, name tag reading Civol, looked up. Her gaze went over Nariah once, then back again, slower this time. Her smile never arrived. You traveling alone? She asked, eyes narrowing. Yes, ma'am, Nariah answered politely. My dad booked the flight for me. Cassandra Vole took the boarding pass from her hand, flipping it over like she expected to find something hidden underneath. This is a first-class ticket. Yes, ma'am. A pause. Then the tone shifted. Do you have a letter of authorization? A guardian's contact number? Proof this ticket is yours. Nariah blinked. No, my dad, he handles all the travel. It's under his name. Malcolm Ellison. Cassandra's expression didn't budge. If anything, it tightened. I've seen this before. Someone tries to sneak into first class with a fraudulent ticket, especially kids traveling alone. I didn't sneak anything, Nariah said, voice lower now. It's a real ticket. Cassandra looked over her shoulder, then back at Nariah. You can wait over there, she said, pointing toward a bench near the wall. Security will verify. Nariah didn't move. But Please step aside, miss. People were watching now. A man in a navy suit frowned at the exchange. An elderly woman clutched her bag a little closer. No one said anything, but she could feel them thinking it. Her ears rang. Her cheeks burned. She pressed her lips together and walked slowly to the bench. A security guard came over. He didn't say much, just asked for her ID, checked the pass again, then walked away. Nothing was resolved, and no one explained anything. When she turned to ask, Cassandra had already waved the next passenger forward. Like Nariah had been an interruption, not a customer. She could have called her dad. He'd probably yell into the phone and fix it in 30 seconds. But she didn't want that. She didn't want to be rescued. She just wanted to be treated like everyone else. Instead, she got up, walked away from the gate, and left the terminal. The rain outside had started without warning, a fine mist coating the pavement. She pulled her hood up and kept walking. She didn't know where she was walking to. Maybe just away from the echo of that woman's voice. At a quiet spot near the parking garage, she sat on a bench and pulled out her phone. She opened the messaging app, started typing something to her dad, then erased it. Then tried again. erased it again. Instead, she opened her notes app and wrote, "Today, I learned that a first-class ticket doesn't mean a thing if your skin doesn't match the seat." By the time Naraya stepped outside, the sky had turned a dull, heavy gray. The kind of sky that doesn't just threaten rain, it promises it. She stood under the overhang just outside the terminal, watching the clouds break open like a held-back cry. She could have called a car. That would have been easy, safer. But everything in her felt cracked open, like calling someone would just make it worse, would just make her feel smaller. So she pulled her hoodie tighter over her curls, gripped the strap of her bag, and walked. The streets beyond the airport were unfamiliar, the kind of neighborhoods you only pass through on your way somewhere else. Cars hissed by, windows fogged with condensation. She walked in silence, the only sound her sneakers slapping the wet pavement. Every step felt heavier than the last, not just from the rain soaking through her clothes, but from the weight of what had happened. She kept hearing the same words in her head, like a song stuck on a loop. This ticket doesn't look right. Who paid for it? Are you traveling alone? Each question had sounded less like protocol and more like accusation. She wasn't scared. She was humiliated. And underneath that, something sharper, something that burned. About 30 minutes into her walk, she passed a narrow brick building with fogged-up windows and a faded green awning, clover and iron. She hadn't been there in months, not since the day she saw a man yelling at one of the workers for getting his order wrong. Naraya had stepped in, nervous as hell, but she'd done it anyway. Not because she wanted attention, but because no one else did. She pushed open the door, a small bell chiming above her. The smell of coffee and cinnamon hit her like a warm blanket. The barista behind the counter blinked, then smiled. "Well, if it isn't our quiet hero," he said. "Just passing through," she mumbled, pushing her wetted back. He didn't ask questions. He didn't press. A few minutes later, he set a steaming mug of cocoa on the counter, slid it toward her without a word. She sat by the window, holding the mug with both hands, feeling the heat sink into her fingers. Outside, the rain kept falling, streaking the glass like tears that wouldn't stop. Inside, the cafe buzzed with a soft kind of calm. A couple whispered over a shared scone. A woman typed on her laptop, earbuds in. No one looked at her like she didn't belong. But in her head, the questions were still there. Why did she have to explain herself just to sit in the seat her father paid for? Why did she need to look a certain way to deserve being treated with decency? Would it have gone differently if she were a tall, white boy in khakis and a Patagonia fleece? She pulled out her phone, not to text, not to call, but to write. She tapped open the Notes app and stared at the blinking cursor before her fingers began to move. I've seen it happen to other people. I've watched them get stared at, second-guessed, told to stand aside. I didn't say anything then. I stayed quiet. This time it was me, and I can't walk past it like it's nothing. Not again. She read the words back to herself, heart thudding. After a while, she stood up, left a $5 bill on the counter, and walked back into the rain. It was almost dark when she reached Stonebridge Heights. The streets were quiet, lawns trimmed, driveways empty, like a world where nothing bad ever happened. Her shoes squelched against the stone path leading up to the front door. Inside, the house smelled like citrus and paper. She dropped her bag by the door and stood there, dripping onto the hardwood floor. From the hallway, her father appeared, holding a phone to his ear. When he saw her, soaked through, eyes glassy but not crying, he froze. Naraya. She didn't speak right away. She just stared at him, at the man who raised her to be strong, but also silent. Then she said, softly but firmly, I didn't get on the plane. What happened? His voice was already rising. They wouldn't let me board. They said I didn't belong there. Her hands clenched, water dripping from her sleeves. She looked at me like I was pretending, like I was trying to scam my way into a seat. Malcolm's jaw tensed. He took a step forward, but Naraya held up a hand. I know you're angry, she said. I am too. But this isn't just about what happened today. He sat down slowly, letting out a long breath. She sat across from him. You always said you wanted to protect me, she said, her voice quieter now. You never told people who I am. You kept my name out of the press. But maybe that's not protection. Maybe that's just silence with a ribbon on it. He stared at her, as if seeing her in a different light. I funded a campaign last year, he finally said, to change racial policies in the school district. Quietly behind the scenes. Why quietly, she asked. He didn't answer. So who's protecting me from your silence? That landed like a stone in the room. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. At the corporate offices of Starjet Airways in Dallas, the blinds were drawn, and the air in the conference room felt heavier than usual. Tense, stale, like no one wanted to be the first to speak. The director of communications, a man named Stuart Bell, leaned over a thick folder and flipped it open without enthusiasm. We've got a complaint coming through legal, he said flatly. Filed anonymously. No name, but there's enough detail here to worry me. Across the table, Cassandra Vole crossed her arms, back straight. She looked unbothered. I followed protocol, she said, her voice clipped and firm. The girl had no guardian present. She was young, suspicious. No letter of consent. I've seen this before. Kids sneaking into cabins they don't belong in. Stuart didn't blink. Cassandra, she had a paid ticket. We get fake tickets all the time, Cassandra replied. It's not just about the paper. It's about who's holding it. That line hung in the air longer than it should have. A younger man at the end of the table, a junior counsel named Theo, cleared his throat. She wasn't trying to sneak in. The boarding pass scanned. And there's surveillance. Cassandra waved a hand, already tired of this. She showed up alone, looking like she was lost. There were no visible credentials, no luggage tag that matched her cabin. I used my judgment. Isn't that what we're told to do? Stuart let out a quiet sigh. Yeah, you used your judgment. Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, Naraya sat up in bed, the glow of her laptop flickering across her face. It was almost 2 a.m., but her eyes were wide open. Not because she wasn't tired, she was, but because her mind wouldn't stop turning. She had typed racial discrimination first-class airline into the search bar. What came back was a flood. Story after story. Black families denied boarding. Latino travelers questioned about their seats. Asian passengers asked to switch. Different names. Same patterns. As she scrolled, she whispered to herself, so it's not just me. There was both comfort and anger in that thought. She opened a blank document and began writing, only this time not for herself. By morning, Malcolm had made his decision. He didn't call. He didn't rant. He just opened his email and typed one line to the CEO of Starjet Airways. The girl your staff turned away is my daughter. See you in court. He hit send. Then he stood there in the kitchen, letting the coffee grow cold in his hand. The news didn't stay buried for long. By noon, a Twitter account named A Justice for Naraya had gone viral. No one knew who started it. Maybe someone in the airport, maybe a witness, maybe someone on the inside. But the video was out there. Grainy, yes, but clear enough. It showed Naraya standing at the boarding gate, speaking politely while Cassandra Vole towered over her, her hand stiffly pointed toward the back wall. No yelling. No pushing. Just something sharper. Quiet rejection. The kind that doesn't leave a bruise, but carves out something deeper. The caption read, she had a first-class ticket. All she lacked was the right look. Within hours, the comments were flooding in. I've been there. Chicago O'Hare. First-class ticket. Still asked 3 times if I was sure. My 12-year-old was pulled aside flying alone. Blonde boy next to him? Not a word. This is not about protocol. This is about profile. It became a conversation. Then it became a storm. In Dallas, the next Starjet board meeting felt like a funeral. The CEO, Warren Neely, stared at the flat screen mounted on the wall. On it was the video. Paused. He turned to Cassandra. What's her name? Cassandra hesitated. I don't remember. A pause. You didn't ask? She looked unsure of herself. I assumed. You assumed, Warren repeated. Silence. I need a statement, he said at last. A real one. Not a press release. Not an apology wrapped in policy speak. A statement. This is bigger than a missed boarding. Cassandra sat back, mouth tight. This is going to ruin me, she said. Warren didn't flinch. This isn't about you anymore. Back in Atlanta, Naraya sat across from her father at the kitchen island. He showed her the news alert, her face on the screen, her name hashtagged. She looked at it for a long time before saying anything. I didn't ask for this, she murmured. Malcolm leaned forward. But maybe it's asking for you. She shook her head slowly. I'm not trying to be a symbol. No, he said gently. But maybe you're tired of being a secret. She looked at him, really looked, and for once saw something vulnerable behind the man who always had every answer. Then let's do this right, she said. The dining room at the Ellison home didn't look like the kind of place where big decisions were made. The long walnut table was more suited for brunches, birthdays, and the occasional quiet dinner. But that morning, it had become something else entirely. Folders lay stacked between coffee mugs and water glasses. A laptop blinked in sleep mode near the edge. Malcolm Ellison stood at the window, his arms crossed, jaw tight. Across from him sat his longtime attorney, Gwen Hollis, and a sharply dressed woman named Dana Russell, a civil rights advocate from the Southern Justice Coalition. Naraya sat at the far end of the table, quiet but alert. She hadn't said much since they started. She just listened. But every now and then, her fingers curled into her sweatshirt sleeves, like she was trying to hold something back. Malcolm broke the silence first. We'll file the suit, he said, his voice low and firm. But we do it quietly. No press. No headlines. The goal is correction, not spectacle. Gwen nodded. We can request confidentiality clauses. Both sides stay silent. It's clean. But Naraya sat up straighter. Why quiet? 3 pairs of eyes turned to her. Malcolm's voice softened. Because media turns things ugly. It'll stop being about what happened to you and start being about who I am. I know, she said. That's the problem. Dana tilted her head, curious. Naraya looked at her father. If we keep this private, if we let them fix it behind a closed door, who's going to know it ever happened? And if no one knows, then the next girl. Maybe she doesn't have a billionaire dad. What happens to her? Malcolm didn't answer right away. He walked to the counter, poured himself more coffee, but didn't drink it. Gwen leaned in. This kind of thing gets nasty fast, Naraya. People dig. They twist stories. You could be picked apart. I already was, she said. At that gate. In front of a whole crowd. I didn't get to control that. But this? I get to choose how I show up. Silence settled over the room again, this time thicker, heavier. Then the front doorbell rang. Malcolm looked puzzled. I'm not expecting anyone. He went to answer it, and a moment later returned with a woman in her 60s. Tall, dark-skinned, with silver hair braided down her back. She wore a long blue cardigan and carried a tote bag with the words "Books Build Better Humans" printed on the side. Mrs. Tramble, Naraya said, surprised. She was your mother's coworker, Malcolm explained softly. Taught 3rd grade across the hall. Mrs. Tramble smiled at Naraya, then walked slowly to the table. I heard, she said. Didn't want to intrude, but I thought maybe it was time I gave you this. From her bag, she pulled a thin envelope, slightly yellowed. Handwritten. Folded neatly. It's a letter your mother wrote to the city council back when you were just a baby. About school zoning. How they were pushing black and brown kids into older buildings with no AC and broken plumbing. She slid the letter across the table to Naraya. They never answered, she said. No surprise there. But your mama didn't write it for them. She wrote it so someone would remember she tried. Naraya opened it. The handwriting was familiar, looped and soft, the way her mom had written grocery lists and birthday cards. She didn't read it all. She didn't need to. The tears in her eyes were already telling her what it meant. She looked up. If my mom had the courage to speak out when no one listened, what excuse do I have now? Malcolm leaned on the chair behind her, fingers gripping the wood. It's not your job to fight every injustice. I'm not trying to fight every injustice, she said. Just the one that happened to me. And, maybe, help the ones that happen next. Dana smiled faintly. I think the world could use more girls like you. Malcolm still looked uneasy. He wanted to protect her. That had always been his instinct, to shield, to provide, to fix things quietly from the background. But now his daughter wasn't asking to be fixed. She was asking to be heard. He took a deep breath. If we go public, we do it carefully. On your terms. No press ambushes. No politics. Naraya nodded. Not about politics. It's about people. It's about not disappearing when someone tries to erase you. He stared at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. I raised you to be wise, he said. Guess I didn't realize how wise. She smiled gently. You raised me to be quiet, but I think I'm done with that. The press conference was held in a small downtown hotel, the kind with beige carpets, plastic water pitchers, and paintings that looked mass-produced. Most of the journalists who showed up didn't know what to expect. The invitation had been vague, a statement regarding recent events involving Starjet Airways. A personal story. No logos. No corporate seals. Just a location, a time, and a name, Ellison. Some assumed it would be a product launch. Others whispered about a startup acquisition or tech scandal. None of them expected to see a 15-year-old girl step up to the mic. Naraya stood behind the podium, hands calm, shoulders back. Her black dress was simple, unbranded, paired with flat shoes and no jewelry. She looked like a kid giving a school speech, until she opened her mouth. My name is Naraya Ellison, she began, her voice steady. And I'm not here today because I want attention. I'm here because something happened to me that shouldn't have happened to anyone. The room fell silent. She didn't read from notes. She didn't need to. Every word had been lived. I had a valid first-class ticket. Paid for. Assigned. Legal. But when I tried to board my flight, I was stopped. Not because of my behavior. Not because of any threat. But because of how I looked. There was no anger in her tone. Just clarity. Measured and real. They asked if I had a guardian. If I had proof that the seat was mine. They questioned whether I belonged there. And when I said my father booked the ticket, they didn't ask who he was. They didn't care. They'd already made up their mind. A few reporters shifted in their chairs. Pens slowed. Phones stopped recording long enough for them to really listen. She looked out over the crowd and paused. I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm not asking for revenge. What I want is accountability. What I want is change. Because if this can happen to me, a girl with every advantage, a girl whose father could buy that airline outright, then what happens to the kids who don't have that? Someone coughed. A few heads lowered. She continued. My father's name is Malcolm Ellison. Some of you know that now. Some of you didn't before. He built his company from nothing. And yes, he has power. But I've spent my life learning how to disappear behind that name. He kept me out of the spotlight to protect me, and I understand why. She took a breath, a deeper one this time. But silence isn't always safety. Sometimes it's just a quieter kind of harm. For a moment, the room felt weightless. Then came the twist that no one in the audience expected. By early afternoon, headlines exploded. Malcolm Ellison funds daughter's civil action against Starjet. But that wasn't the real story. The deeper shock came from what surfaced next. Cassandra Vole, now identified as the gate agent in question, had a history. 4 years earlier, she was involved in another discrimination claim. A black passenger in business class had been publicly questioned about his credentials. The case was quietly settled, documents sealed. Now, that history was out. Social media lit up. How many others did they hush? How long do you let someone use their judgment when their judgment keeps failing the same kind of people? Not just one bad apple. This is about the tree. The narrative shifted. It was no longer just about a teenager being mistreated. It became about a pattern, one that people had whispered about for years but rarely proven. Back in the conference room, a reporter raised a hand. Miss Ellison, do you plan to file additional charges now that more has come to light? She shook her head. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I'm just someone who got tired of watching people be treated like they're invisible. Another voice. What do you hope happens next? Her answer was simple. I hope they look closer. Not just at what happened to me, but at why it keeps happening. After the press left, Naraya sat in the quiet of the empty room, sipping cold water from a paper cup. Malcolm joined her, jacket slung over one shoulder, tie loosened. "You did well," he said quietly. "I didn't want to do well," she replied. "I just wanted to be heard." He nodded. "You were." Then she looked up at him, a slight smile on her face. "Feels weird though. Being seen, because I'm your daughter. Not just me." Malcolm studied her for a moment. Maybe this was the first time the world saw both. Inside the tall glass headquarters of Starjet Airways, the executive boardroom was anything but calm. There were no raised voices, no pounding fists, but the tension pressed down like weather before storm. Every screen in the room glowed with charts, stock performance, brand sentiment, social media heat maps. Warren Neely, Starjet CEO, stood at the head of the table, looking 10 years older than he had last week. He spoke into the silence. "We need to issue an apology. Public. Specific. Immediate." A few board members exchanged glances. One woman, early 50s, finance-focused, cleared her throat. "With respect, Warren, the second we admit fault, our market value drops. We need to be careful." He didn't look up. "We weren't careful when it counted." Across the hall, Cassandra Vole sat in a smaller room with her attorney, voice low but urgent. "They're going to throw me under the bus," she said. Her lawyer tapped a tablet screen. "You already signed off on procedural correctness. That helps. We can frame this as a training failure, not a personal one." Cassandra pressed her palms against her face. "I did what I was trained to do. I trusted my gut. And now that kid's a national headline." "You don't get to control the headline," her lawyer said quietly. "Only how you respond." Back in Atlanta, Malcolm stood at the edge of the living room while Naraya paced slowly. "I think it should be a panel," she said. "Not just a press conference. A real conversation." Malcolm folded his arms. "That's not how these things are usually done." "Maybe that's the problem." She stopped pacing, met his eyes. "We invite Starjet. Invite journalists, yes. But also people it's happened to. Not just me. Make it real." Malcolm hesitated. "If this goes wrong, it's not just your name on it. It's mine too." Naraya didn't flinch. "Then maybe it's time we both used it." Their attorney, Gwen, who had flown in for the week, raised a brow. "I can't advise this," she said. "Naraya shouldn't be speaking without counsel present. You're not a plaintiff anymore. You're a symbol. People will look for cracks." Malcolm's voice cut through. "She's not speaking anymore," he said. "She's leading." 2 days later, the room was set neutral ground. A university auditorium with cameras discreetly placed. No branding. No podiums. They called it a public accountability forum, but it felt more personal than official. The stage had a semicircle of chairs. On them sat Naraya, Warren Neely, a journalist from a national paper, and a former flight attendant named Janice Rowe. Janice spoke first. "I worked for Starjet for 11 years, she said. "I was told more than once to stick to the back half of the plane. I was the only black woman on most of my flights. Passengers assumed I wasn't senior crew. Managers let it happen." She paused, eyes scanning the room. "I stayed quiet because I thought speaking up would cost me everything. But watching a 15-year-old speak up made me realize how much I'd already lost." The room was quiet, but not stiff. It was the kind of silence that listens. Then Warren Neely turned to Naraya. "Miss Ellison," he said slowly, "on behalf of Starjet Airways, I'm sorry." He paused. "I'm sorry we failed you. I'm sorry we didn't create a culture that prevented this. And I'm sorry we didn't listen sooner." He looked at her, not past her, not over her. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added, "but I do want to change." Naraya took a breath before responding. "An apology is a start," she said. "But change doesn't happen because someone's sorry. It happens because someone finally does something different." She looked out over the audience, students, community leaders, former passengers, and quiet people who'd come just to be present. "I didn't come here to be the girl in the headline. I came here because someone has to say the quiet parts out loud." The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The stillness that followed her words was its own kind of thunder. Afterward, Malcolm met her backstage. He didn't say much, just wrapped his arm around her shoulders and whispered, "You made space for people today." She nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Not on what had been said, but on what would come next. Because now the world was listening, and silence was no longer an option. The yard was quiet that night. The kind of quiet that only came after long days filled with noise and headlines and things you couldn't take back. Crickets buzzed low in the grass, and somewhere down the block, a sprinkler ticked on, slow and steady. Naraya sat on the old wooden bench near the fence, knees tucked to her chest, hoodie zipped halfway up. She looked up at the stars, not searching for anything, just letting them be there. She heard the sliding door creak behind her and didn't need to turn to know who it was. Malcolm walked across the patio with the familiar rhythm of someone deep in thought. He stopped just short of the bench, held something small in his hand. "I haven't been out here in a while," he said. "Your mom used to sit here. Said it made the world feel less loud." Naraya gave a soft smile. "It still does." He sat down beside her, careful, like he didn't want to break the stillness between them. "You nervous?" he asked. She shrugged. "Not really. Just ready." He nodded. They sat for a moment without speaking. Then he opened his hand and held out something wrapped in cloth. "I think it's time you had this." Inside was a simple bracelet, woven leather, worn at the edges, with a tiny silver charm that looked like a feather. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't expensive. But it was full of memory. She wore it every time she spoke at school board meetings, Malcolm said. Said it reminded her why she had to speak up. Said it made her brave. Naraya ran her fingers over the charm. "Why now?" she asked. Malcolm looked out toward the streetlights. "Because tomorrow everything changes. No matter what happens, people will look at you differently." She met his gaze. "Then I want to make sure they see me clearly." He nodded slowly. "The day you were born, your mother said to me, 'Don't raise her to be safe. Raise her to be right.' I think you've already passed us both." The next morning, the news station was already buzzing by 8 a.m. bright lights. Brighter makeup. A producer counting down with fingers in the air. Naraya sat in the guest chair, mic clipped, calm but focused. Across from her sat Cassandra Vole. It was the first time they'd been face to face since that day at the gate. Cassandra looked composed, her blazer crisp, her posture perfect. But there was a slight tension behind her eyes, the kind that doesn't show unless you know where to look. The host asked the first question. "Cassandra, when you made the decision to stop Naraya from boarding, did you believe you were acting fairly?" "I followed protocol," Cassandra replied. "We're trained to watch for inconsistencies, especially with unaccompanied minors. I didn't know who she was. I just did what I thought was best in the moment." Naraya didn't flinch. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't raise her voice or get defensive. She just leaned slightly forward. "Protocols don't say, 'Assume the worst when someone looks different,'" she said. "They don't say, 'Doubt them if they don't match your idea of what belongs.' That wasn't training. That was choice." The host glanced between them. Cassandra's jaw tightened. It was a judgment call. "And that's what needs to change," Naraya said. "Because those judgment calls keep happening to people who look like me. And too often, nothing changes." There was a pause, and for a moment, the air on set seemed to still. Then the host asked the question they all knew was coming. "So what do you want, Naraya? From Starjet?" "From Cassandra." She took a breath. "I don't want her fired," she said. "I don't want a check. I want something that lasts longer than a headline." She reached down beside her, picked up a folder, and placed it on the table. "This is a policy proposal. It's a plan for cross-cultural training, not just how to follow rules, but how to understand people, how to see them, not just scan them." She looked directly at Cassandra. "I'm not here to end someone's career. I'm here to ask why that career keeps running over the same kinds of people, and how we fix that." Cassandra didn't speak, but she looked like she was listening. The courtroom was quiet when the judge gave her final words. It wasn't dramatic. No one gasped or shouted. There was no gavel slam echoing through the room. Just a firm voice stating what everyone already knew. Starjet Airways was liable. The evidence, the video, the witness testimony, it all pointed in one direction. There wasn't much for their lawyers to argue. The apology had already been issued. The damage had already been done. StarJet agreed to a financial settlement, though the amount was never made public, and more importantly, a public commitment to overhaul their training protocols, internal oversight, and customer interaction standards. It could have ended there. For most people, it would have. Case closed. But not for Naraya. The press wanted Malcolm Ellison. Cameras camped out in front of his company's offices. Reporters tracked his movements. Analysts speculated on what the lawsuit meant for his brand. But Malcolm never said a word. "I didn't start this," he told Gwen, his lawyer. "And I'm not the one people need to hear." So when the invitation came for a sit-down interview, it went to Naraya. She accepted. The studio was clean and modern, a soft set bathed in blues and grays. She sat in the guest chair, her posture relaxed but alert. No one prompted her. The host smiled and leaned in. "Do you think you won?" she asked. Naraya smiled back, soft but certain. "I don't think this was about winning or losing. I think this was about something that should never have happened in the first place. And now it's about what we do next." There was a pause, and the host nodded, like she'd expected a different answer, but couldn't deny that this one landed deeper. Across town, in a separate press room, Cassandra Voles sat behind a short table. No logo behind her, no PR team in sight. Her hair was tied back, her blazer plain. She looked tired, not broken, but stripped back. Honest, maybe for the first time. "I don't think I'm a racist," she said. "But I acted like someone who is. And that's something I have to sit with." She didn't cry. She didn't shift blame. "I let fear and bias speak louder than facts. That's not just a mistake, it's a failure. And I'm not here today to defend it. I'm here because I want to understand how I got there." She paused, then added, "I've agreed to step away from my role. Not just because I lost the right to it, but because I need to learn. I've joined StarJet's new internal training program, not to keep my job, but to understand why I shouldn't have kept it." No one clapped. But no one walked out either. And that, in its own way, was progress. A year later, the sun poured through the windows of a downtown auditorium, filled with rows of teenagers, teachers, and a few older folks who had come just to listen. It was the opening session of a National Youth Forum on Justice and Equity. On the large screen behind the stage, white letters scrolled across a black background. "Welcome to the forum. When the next generation refuses to stay quiet." The audience hushed as a young woman walked up to the mic. She wasn't hidden behind a last name this time. No one introduced her as Malcolm Ellison's daughter. No one needed to. She stood in the center, holding the mic like she'd been born with it in her hand. Her hair framed her face, her posture firm but open. "My name is Naraya," she began. She looked across the crowd. Hundreds of faces staring back, waiting. "There was a time I thought silence was strength. That if I kept my head down, things would pass. That being polite would protect me." She paused, breathing in. But silence doesn't protect you. It just makes you invisible to the people who already weren't looking. A quiet murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. "I used to think I was just one voice," she said. "But now I know one voice can be enough. One voice can be the start." She stepped back for a moment, glanced at the screen behind her, then back at the audience. "I'm not speaking just for myself today. I'm speaking for every person who was told to move aside, to wait their turn, to not make noise. I'm speaking for the people who never got the chance to be heard." She let the words hang, then finished. "My name is Naraya. I used to be quiet, but today, I speak for millions who were told they didn't belong. And I've never felt stronger."